Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce Tech Trends webinar, organized by the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. I am Marcelo Sarkis, co-chair of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce Innovation, Science, and Technology Committee, past president of the Chamber, and founder and president of Prima IP. First, we would like to acknowledge that this land where we are is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe-Chippewa peoples, home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land.
Thank you, Marcelo. Hi, everyone. I am Raquel Boechat. I'm the co-chair of the Bccc IST committee and CEO and founder of Canada's StartHub. As part of our commitment to diversity and inclusion in our activities, we are going to read the DI statement. Together, we stand as leaders, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recognize that DEI is not just the right thing to do, but essential for our organization's success. We lead the change, understanding that diversity and inclusion practices must permeate all aspects of our businesses. By weaving DEI into the fabric of our organization, we cultivate an environment where every individual drives and feels a sense of belonging, innovation flourishes, and collective potential is realized. Let us forge ahead, united in our mission to create a diverse and inclusive future that transcends boundaries and elevates us all.
Thank you, Raquel. We also want to thank our annual sponsors, Vale, Proactiva Results, Brookfield, BMA Law, Mellowhawk Logistics, and all our members and partners for their continued support. We are an independent, nonprofit organization promoting business relations between Brazil and Canada for over 50 years. At the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, we connect.
That's true, Marcelo, and I'm very excited to be here today with two outstanding leaders. So I also want to thank Andrea Gardella, founder, director, and principal economist at Alcance Solutions, and Gina Soparlo, senior advisor, strategic partnerships, global markets at Mitacs, for accepting our invitation to participate in this discussion and share with us all the experience they had in this mission in Brazil. So without further ado, we would like to invite Andrea and Gina to discuss with us, join us in this discussion about the last trends seen during the missions in Brazil and about the innovative and tech ecosystem there.
Perfect. Muito obrigada, Raquel. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, de nada, imagina, Andrea. My pleasure. So I will start with the first question. We've seen in two big regions in Brazil, many opportunities to connect with international companies, international startups, international innovation hubs, because it were there not only Brazilian organizations, but 42 countries in Santa Catarina. So I'd like to listen to both of you. What were the key global drivers for innovation that you could see there in your experience, in your work? Gina, would you like to start?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to be on the mission, and I'm so excited to kind of unwrap all of the insights and the learnings here, and especially with someone so smart. We coined her the smartest person on the mission, Andrea. So to be beside her is like wonderful. So some of the key drivers that I see for innovation, especially at Mitacs, which is, you know, an agnostic or open to any sector. One of the key things that we see, I think, is just quality of life in all senses. So obviously, you know, post pandemic, we saw a huge uptake in health tech, biotech, looking at those kinds of things, but even down to the mental health. There are so many tech startups coming out now that are really trying to tackle and fill the gaps, honestly, a lot of the time in our health system of what is being offered in terms of mental health and almost putting all of those services and offerings into one. But even when you talk quality of life, that talks about psychological safety too, which when you talk about cybersecurity, that's a form of quality of life, right? Knowing that this thing that is the internet that you have access to, that has access to you in your entire life, being able to protect yourself and have that psychological safety of accessing all of these things at once, but knowing that you're not going to be putting yourself in harm. And then I think the other thing that we're seeing a lot is as a driver for innovation is community and honestly, I don't know if this is, you know, overdone, but the sustainable development goals, so this kind of betterment for all of society and for all of community. So I even think of a lot of the tech companies that we saw were there to support other companies, you know, almost a service to other companies to do better in their business. So it's a lot of community, a lot of just overall holistic supporting of the ecosystem.
Thank you, Gina. And I think when you are saying this, you are also talking about impact, right? How
Yes.
organizations innovate and create a more sustainable and more impact, positive impact in all the areas that we are involved. So, Andrea, can you talk a little bit about this? And you analyze and research a lot about impact and potential opportunities to invest and do business in different countries in Latin America. So what could you see in the mission and also in your work that are the key global drivers for innovation today?
Yes, thank you so much, Raquel and Marcelo, for hosting us, and Gina, thank you for the kind words, and it was a pleasure to be with all of you on the mission. And I have to say, it was not my first time in Brazil, but it was certainly a new kind of experience traveling with such an amazing group of people that are involved in many different ways. And throughout the mission, it really highlighted, I would say, you know, three things. As a caveat, you know, as a risk analyst, I look at risk, but I look at risk as an opportunity for innovation. And so I would highlight that, you know, or I would highlight and encourage companies to think long term. And three key areas that I saw while we were on the mission, whether for the first time or just kind of solidified some views of Brazil and of other markets. But the first is the focus on climate change, both its impacts by the way in which companies should equip themselves to appropriately understand and assess the risks, whether, you know, physical, like floods and droughts, and particularly, you know, Brazil and Canada are two places that have experienced that most recently as well in Brazil. And so my thoughts go out to folks there, but also on the transition side of things, where you have to think about regulation and policy changes, and that came up during our conversations, and ways in which, you know, companies are looking to address that or be prepared for that. And it really is a matter of risk preparedness. But on the other side of that, it just shows that there's abundant opportunities to reach that net zero economy by 2050. And that is done through innovation. You do it through the use of current, but new technologies as well. You know, a technology that's currently being used for one purpose could be repurposed to be used for more sustainable activities. And that's something that I encourage companies to look at. And so climate change was definitely a topic, and I think a key driver of innovation moving forward. The second one, and Gina touched on it, was sustainable and equitable economic development. I think the need to improve economic inclusion throughout the world was abundantly felt through the pandemic, and I think it really made it something that organizations need to put front and center and incorporate those social considerations and how goods and services are deployed and made and so on. And so one of the greatest examples in driving financial inclusion is fintech, and Brazil is a global benchmark in this space. And so you heard about fintech and how much innovation was coming out of Brazil in this space, and now in new areas, new technological areas. Data and modeling was another one, and how to use that in the best way possible. And so really necessity is such a powerful impetus for innovation, and you're seeing that through the need for more sustainable and equitable development. And then the last one is post-pandemic, and this is where I really put my risk analyst hat on, is organizations are so much more risk-minded, which I find leads them to think of new ways, and whether it's brand new ways and opening their minds to new ways of working, but also of repurposing the way that they do things to more effectively and quickly address disruptions. And I think, one of the ones that Gina mentioned, the health challenges and the health crisis that came out of the pandemic, countries and companies had to adjust very quickly. Supply chains was another one, which I think globally we were all felt it, both as consumers and companies. And cybersecurity is another one. Of course, vulnerability, when you're all online and everybody's moved onto the cloud, it was a huge shock for organizations to figure out and to navigate those new risks. And so you had those types of themes coming out of the discussions that we had throughout our visit in Brazil. And I would say that those kind of three ones are not only themes, but drivers of innovation moving forward for sure.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And one question before I go to Marcelo. We've been through a big change now using AI. So I would say one of the big innovation new chapters we have, right? And most of the companies that are not tech and are not from AI and technology based, they are worried to be behind even more with all this movement that is happening now. So my question is how the companies, traditional companies, can be part of it and can be prepared for those changes caused by innovation, and how Mitacs and Alcance Solutions and with your work, this can be helpful to support those companies to be closer to this big change that is moving all of us.
I'll kick it off if that works, because I think it flows really well to some partnerships and work that Mitacs does in many different areas. The first thing is, and I worked in the financial industry for many years, and you would think that banks are all very data minded, but you'd be surprised how siloed organizations can be. And banks is a perfect example of that. But the way that you kind of get started is be data minded. So know what data you have, know the power of data, because the data is what's going to drive your AI models and in the ways in which you can use it. There's so many organizations now that are either building AI tools in-house to protect themselves against cybersecurity, for example, to address their challenges with supply chains. And they're doing it out of necessity, but also, think of other ways in which you can leverage those types of modeling. And it doesn't have to be these extravagant, massive tools. And I think it's interesting that over the last couple of months, I'm hearing more that, these large projects can be maybe a little bit more hype than reality. And so let's take a step back and look at the real practical ways in which we can leverage data and modeling, and AI is a perfect tool for that. And so I think the first thing is be data minded. and then get some help from some data experts out there. And Raquel, I know your organization could certainly be one of them, but Mitacs is another one of working with different organizations. So Gina, over to you.
Definitely. And you almost like just touched on one of the main things that I wanted to mention, which was know your capital and know your team. And your team is not only those that are on your payroll. So when innovation comes, you can adapt with it and you can move with it. And it does take capital, but know that there's so much capital out there that is outside of your organization, but that's there for you. So when we talk about human capital, we have so many organizations here in Canada and entities here in Canada that are publicly funded, that are free services to help your company move along with innovation. So Mitacs, for example, has a team across Canada that is there to support you in understanding the innovation ecosystem. When we were in Brazil, we saw Fieschi, for example, that had these, this huge facility. So there are things available to you that are outside your team. And it really is worth it to spend the time to kind of map that out, because then the return that you'll get on that investment of time is tenfold, because these people are there to have your company succeed. That's their KPIs. On the human capital side too, there are so many institutions and so many students, and Mitacs supports you to get the connection to that. But Mitacs is one in many, right? Mitacs here in Ontario, we have OCI. There's also the National Research Council here in Canada, and there's many counterparts that have very similar programs in Brazil from what we saw. And most of the universities that we saw had some kind of internship or co-op program as well. So know that there are those kinds of things that are outside of your actual payroll team, and dip into them. And then the other side is obviously the capital, the financial capital side, and look into the non-dilutive funding, right? So look into what is available to you from your government, sources like Mitacs. And again, I know sometimes these applications take time, but getting behind on the innovation will cost you more. So put in the time to get those projects moving forward. It takes you a couple times to get used to some of these applications, and then you'll understand them, right? And sometimes those teammates that you have that aren't on your payroll can support you in that, so you can adapt with this ecosystem. And of course, when you talk about non-dilutive funding, even when you're talking about venture capital and seed funding, money loves money. So where you're getting other money, the other money will probably follow. So remember that, and moving along that with innovation.
Amazing, Gina. Thank you very much. Marcelo, I think it's with you now.
Thank you. Great discussion so far. One, I think, Gina, you mentioned, or maybe Andrea mentioned about being data-minded and looking at data. One of the startups or one of the companies that came to my mind as soon as you mentioned that I felt was on the leading edge, but also using data to help businesses improve, was that neuroscience company, because they were really they're looking at the data and they were using that data in order to help businesses succeed. So that it was the one that came to my mind. I'd like, this is to both Andrea and Gina. What to you stood out as the main developments that you saw during the mission to Brazil?
And we can trade off, Andrea. I'll go first. I saw, one of the things is that it really, and I'm a huge fan of analogies, but it unclogged pores, so to speak. So I felt that, one, the profiles of the companies that we brought were quite different. No one really had the same profile of company, but those pores between those silos seemed to be broken, because there really ended up being conversations in these companies that might not actually necessarily, organically speaking, here in Canada, have had connections, right? And it wasn't just an interpersonal connection. There was really something there that could happen within a business and a tech setting. But also talking vertically in terms of, micro level economy all the way up into government. There was a lot of unclogging of the pores there. We really had, every level represented. And again, actual conversations and transactions that could lead into something happening, because the BCCC was able to get all of those people in the same room, which was important because even when Andrea, you talked about policy, having the government level or the municipality level people hear from the people that are actually on the leading edge or the researchers that are on the leading edge, it makes them think, right? And then I was able to have conversations to actually support those in a bilateral setting. So when you, kind of put a mission like this together and you unclog those pores between all of these different silos, you can really see how things can start happening and moving quite quickly.
Great,
Yeah,
Andrea.
yes, and I'll say for myself from a slightly different perspective because I've been traveling to Brazil for many years and having all these different types of discussions, but this was the first trade mission where you were really part of a group and you were visiting different ecosystems. And what I saw firsthand in visiting those ecosystems and what really stood out to me is there's a very palpable entrepreneurial spirit in Brazil. There's a hustle that you see, and there's so many active young people that are starting these businesses to meet particular needs within their community, and then some thinking abroad and thinking beyond that. One of the challenges that I have grappled with in when you think about Brazil and its potential is that about a third of new businesses in Brazil don't make it past their second year. And so about more than half of Brazilian businesses are one-person businesses. And so you can think they're very much meeting a very specific need, whether it's in restaurant business or different kind of services. And so what I was struck by was the growth of these innovation hubs and these incubators in Brazil being a bridge to expanding beyond the necessity-based services and towards broader application. And so we met with companies that were developing apps for cleaning services, all the way to developing AI models to ensure energy production was efficient. And so you had everything in between, and you had these ecosystems where people could discuss these ideas and the pitches that we did on several occasions to learn what other companies did. And so I think that startup communities we visited were really a testament to the potential of ecosystems in driving growth of startups and ensuring that longevity. And so I was really, really struck by that. And that leads me to another thing that came up a few times is the interest of Brazilian companies to go to North America and seeing that as an area of opportunity, because you're seeing Canada as a bridge to so many other markets. Canada has an abundance of trade agreements, and it could be really a door versus just Canada seeing Brazil as an area to take advantage of one of the largest markets in the world. And so you have these synergies between the two markets. And the second, or the last thing I'll mention is the constant talk about AI. Like it was actually quite surprising. As an economist, I live in data, and so to me, I was very excited. But I think to hear the use and seeing the potential in data and modeling to create opportunities was great. And we saw a varied number of companies looking at AI, different levels of sophistication. And yeah, the neuroscience example was a great one for consumer uses. And then Aquarella that was doing it for operational efficiencies, and they had phenomenal examples of their use and their sophistication. So it's there's a lot of developments, and the mission really highlighted quite a few of them.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I just heard a couple of days ago, because there's a lot of negative news out there in relation to AI, saying that AI is going to take your job away from you, or where it's going to cause unemployment. But I actually saw another statement which says it's not AI that is going to get you out of the market. It's your competitor that is using AI that is going to get you out of the market. So you need to use it as a tool to help you succeed in business, because if you don't, your competitor is going to be using it sooner or later. And you mentioned the diversity in terms, I think, Gina, you mentioned the diversity of the companies that we saw throughout the throughout the trip to Brazil. And yeah, I mean, I remember not just high tech, but we saw low tech, if you will. We saw microbreweries, we saw artisanal food companies selling organic honeys, organic foods, and whatnot. And you know, one thing that struck out uh, to me was the flurry of activity at the Canadian booth. We seem to get the most activity, people coming in and inquiring. As you mentioned, they were quite interested in internationalizing their business. So they were coming in, and I think they felt very welcome and comfortable and at ease to speaking with us who were there in the booth about opportunities in terms of internationalization, the logistics around internationalization, entering into Canada, depending on your product or your service. And to me, I thought that was very um, I was very happy to see that in terms of these companies looking north, looking towards expanding their business out of Brazil. In regards to internationalization, what to you are the benefits of participating in these trade missions and cross-border representations? And since Gina answered the question first last time, we'll let Andrea go first.
There we go. Back and forth, just a flow, a real good flow.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, this was my first, and so I was so pleasantly surprised. Not to, you know, I've been working with the BCCC for several years, and I knew it was going to be a very well thought out and supported mission. But I think what really, a few things that really stood out is because there was a diversity of businesses, it really forced you to, me as an entrepreneur, it's been about 2 years since I've been running my own company, to really force yourself to, you know, find the best ways to talk about your business to different types of companies and different types of organizations, because you never know who you could meet. And this mission was a perfect testament of that, of finding connections with companies that you wouldn't have thought, first of all, would be a great connection from a business perspective and just from relationship building. And relationship building was huge, because one of the things that I always encourage companies, whether in my previous life or currently, is you have to go to market. You have to go to market to understand what kind of, you know, how business is done, you know, the cultural differences, but also the similarities, meeting the people. I mean, the reality is doing business in Brazil is not something that just happens overnight. You do build those relationships. You do, you know, spend time to understand what are the needs and how you can actually meet them. And the mission was such a great way to do that. And Marcelo, you mentioned it, our booth was happening. It was the hot ticket of FIN Brasil, and I don't know, I'm assuming it was the same at Web Summit and South Summit. But it was great to see, because there was interest and there was bilateral interest. We were both interested in understanding each other and what our potential needs were. And those conversations you can't just have online, and you can't just, you know, pick up the phone and have them. It's in that that environment that you have them. And so, I think taking advantage of that, learning from other companies, going to market and understanding what the needs are, and having those conversations in person and talking through what some of the challenges are and what the interests are. I think trade missions are such a perfect way to do that. And it's a great way to promote your business. I mean, realistically, you know, we're thinking about that. We're thinking about business development, and trade missions are a great way to do that. And you do that through partners that have the connections, and the BCCC has those connections. They know what they're doing in Brazil. And so folks, I encourage anyone that hasn't done one, do think about doing trade missions and look at, there's all different types of them as well. So it's something I certainly encourage as a step to internationalization. If you're not sure quite how to do it with a group is a great way to introduce yourself to it.
Thank you, Andrea. Gina.
I think Andrea covered it. I think truly, I think she really covered it. And I mean, the last point I think is quite key, especially for a lot of Canadian companies. Canadian companies are very low risk, right? So doing things within that kind of trade mission setting, that cohort type setting, with this team of trusted advisors and trusted network, really lowers that barrier for you to participate. So I think that was a really important point that she mentioned.
So I have a segue to this question, so I'm going to break from what we have, but some of the delegates, and Andrea, you said this was your first trade mission, but some of the delegates on this mission, this was their first time out of their city, not just even out of their country. Could you comment on, and I think, Andrea, you mentioned cultural differences, which is something, and even business differences, but could you comment on whether you experienced a barrier in with respect to language? Because a lot of Canadians, when they hear about Brazil, they just say it's not an English-speaking country, and that may be a significant barrier for someone looking to internationalize, and they may only think about, regional expansion, i.e. the US, European, English-speaking countries, etc. But could you both just provide some of your own commentary and your experience as being part of the mission to Brazil?
The flow. We'll keep the flow.
The flow, Gina, it's your turn.
It's so funny that you said that, Marcelo, because I had a company that wanted to come, and the first question they said was, why would I don't speak Portuguese? And I said, why wouldn't you? Like, what? No. And truly, I mean, obviously, there's always going to be some conversations that need to be worked around, but especially when coming again on a trade mission like this, you have people who are bilingual or I think it's multiglots. Is that what it's called when people can speak more than one language? And so we were really able to communicate in so many different languages. And so if you do have, that barrier of that you don't know the language of the country that you're going into, going on a trade mission is a wonderful way to kind of get over that, or to have someone translate for you. But speaking specifically to Brazil, as someone who doesn't speak Portuguese yet, I really didn't see that it was a huge issue. There was some instances where we did need translation, but a lot of the business community in Brazil really did speak very well in English. And so we were really able to have organic conversations between most of the participants on the mission. And two, what I would say is that beyond a mission, language, the Brazilian diaspora, in Canada is actually quite big. And so with some of the connections that you could make in Canada, bringing on someone on your team, contracting someone on your team, is not going to be an issue. There is going to be someone that could support your company in that time of transition, and then using, hiring someone down there, potentially by using an intern program like Mitacs to, get your first foot in the door. So there are things that can easily support that gap, super easily.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gina, you touched on exactly what I was thinking, is that there are ways to support. I had previously mostly traveled to Rio, Sao Paulo, and Brazilian. Everyone spoke English. Everyone I met And Santa Catarina was probably the first place where I really had to flex and polish off my introduction to Portuguese. And so it was there was a bit of a difference, but you're absolutely right, Gina, in saying that most people we spoke to spoke English, and there were ways in which to communicate. Marcelo, Raquel were there to support us as well if ever we needed some support. And that's one of the benefits of doing a trade mission, is that you're not going into these markets that maybe would seem quite different and new all by yourself. You're going there with a group, with the support, and with different tools at your disposal. And then thinking about whether another market outside of Canada or North America, or an English-speaking market, is where you want to grow your business. Think of ways in which to leverage some of the government programs that are out there, Mitacs being one example, and seeing ways in which you can get that language experience, because language is a barrier, sure, but it's one that can be overcome, and there's ways to work through that. I'm starting my Portuguese lessons in a few weeks, and so that's how I'm going to give it a shot and see how it goes. But there's so many ways in which to help get support in that regard, and so I encourage you to look beyond those concerns.
That's great. Thanks, Andrea. And I just wanted to touch, a couple of things. Because education is a very big focus in Brazil, we found at the International Business Trade Show that they had an abundance of interpreters. Most of these were university educated or university students who were looking for an opportunity to practice their English, and their level of comprehension was very, very good. So I thought that was one thing that was key, that stood out to me during this mission.
Yeah,
So now I'm going to push it
Marcelo.
over to Raquel.
Thank you, Marcelo. And I want also to add something. I remember one of our participants in the mission, he was challenged to speak Portuguese and make a speech for the first time. He didn't know how to speak, and he found a way. He used the Google Translation, and he spoke beautifully about his business without knowing Portuguese. But I think the language barrier is not the most challenging part. I think building trustable connections in a safe space where you feel comfortable, even to use a translation if you need, if you are embraced by the others, and if you feel welcome, this changes a lot the way you are received. And I think both of them, Canadian companies and Brazilian companies, were open to build those relationships. So I would say one thing that is very important is to understand the cultural differences and respect them. And I think that happened very much in our mission, and create a space where you feel welcome and you can make mistakes, even speaking something different, but people can understand what you mean. That's the most important. And just touching base about some of the big difference that I thought, and also similarities between the Brazilian and the Canadian ecosystem. When Andrea was talking about the incubators, the business incubators and innovation spaces in Brazil, I saw in the mission and also in the Web Summit, where everyone was speaking in English, by the way, the Web Summit Rio, everyone, all the pitches, everything was in English. I saw a very strong support from the business incubators and accelerators. We have an ecosystem that grew a lot in Brazil, in different clusters, not only in the biggest center in São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, but also in the Northeast, Southeast. There are many clusters of innovation. And what we saw is that these groups, they are preparing the companies to expand inside Brazil. If you think about a country that is 230 million people, right? So it's different countries inside the same one. So they prepare them for the cultural difference inside the country. Despite Canada that prepares the companies and nurture the companies to go global, to expand to other countries and overseas. So that is my question. Andrea and Gina, what would you highlight about the main differences or similarities between Brazilians and Canadians regarding the innovation ecosystem?
My turn. And so I would say that, and I say this with full disclosure that you know, tech ecosystems, incubators, this is a new space for me of getting to know, what they look like. And so forgive me if I misrepresent anything, and correct me, anyone, please do. But from what I saw, the differences between Canada and Brazil is, in Brazil, there is, let's say, a more palpable entrepreneurial spirit. I think, again, out of necessity, that kind of seeps into the startup and innovation ecosystems. And there's a close collaboration, not just with the industry themselves and being sponsored by major industry universities, but also regional and local governments, which in Canada, and Gina, you probably better placed to speak to this, but at least my understanding is that those three pieces don't always fit in Canada in all of the ecosystems and hubs that we have here. You have university, you have industry, but then sometimes you're lacking that government piece, which sometimes are so key, particularly when you're looking at tech innovation, because in most cases, you're looking at new ways of using tech. And sometimes you need a little bit of that support, whether it's from a policy, regulatory, but also maybe funding. And so that was, I think, one of the key differences I saw in that space. But because both markets, they're very well endowed in many of the same types of natural resources. You have some industries that are just so complementary, and maybe folks would see them as competition, but there's so many opportunities to complement them, because we're at different stages of development or at different stages of production in each of those industries, and we can learn from the technology being developed in either country. And even in one case, Gina and I were chatting with a drone company, and Gina asked the great question of, like, okay, well, you work in agriculture. Have you thought of working in minus 30-degree weather, or in crops that are very different? And so it helps having those discussions and talking about the similarities, but also maybe some of the key differences, allows for those innovative discussions to be had. And then you can think about, oh, well, how can my technology then be applied in other ways? And I think that's something that we can take advantage of, those differences that we have amongst our markets, to find innovation in technology.
Gina. Thank you, Andrea. Great.
So one of the main things that I had thought about was actually one of the things, Andrea, that you had mentioned earlier, was that, well, the entrepreneurship, but also how Brazilian companies, I think they dive headfirst in. They are so quick to get on the entrepreneurship train, and Canadians do take a little bit longer, but like, it's almost like tortoise and hare, but no one's actually finishing the race yet. So I think we can both learn a lot from each other. That low risk, Canada doesn't want to take any big risks. Canadians we're so risk adverse. Brazilians are just ready, like you said, Andrea, because they have to. The need is there, so we're just going to do it. And so I think that there's a lot that each other could learn within those both different types of entrepreneurship culture. Raquel, it's funny that you also mentioned, because one of the things I had mentioned was that actually both countries can really learn to internationalize a little bit better. I think Canada is getting better on a programs system to help companies do that, but the adoption of companies into it isn't necessarily happening. So one of the programs that Mitacs has, for example, is this award that gives companies money to travel into new markets. And sometimes it is crazy how much I have to beg companies, like, do you want to go somewhere? Like, do you want to go into a market? I have this award. Send me your application, please. And it's not a hard application. And the companies still have not sent it in. So there's just this holdback of, even though this is available to them, not going into any market or just anything other than the States. So I was at a talk a while back, and one of the things that they mentioned was that Canadian companies, and I feel like this might be similar with Brazil, is because there's such big markets domestically, that some people within the managerial to C-suite levels don't actually have international business experience, which is then thwarting the company to actually integrate that into their business model and into their strategic planning. So it's not seen as a priority. And then that just keeps kind of reinventing itself in this vicious circle. So making sure that, one, we are, kind of upskilling and reprofiling our people within the businesses that we do have now, to get into international business, to know how to do it, to get exposure to international partners and international settings. But also, coming from the work integrated learning world and the post-secondary institution world, making sure that we have curriculum that in itself is inherently international. Someone who does an international MBA isn't the only person who can go abroad and do some kind of international exchange or international project or international, co-op. It really should be embedded within both countries, their curriculum on all fronts, to make sure that once people get into businesses, they have that international mindset, whether they're an engineer or they're an MBA student or, what have you, that they have that international know-how and that global business mindset. I think both sides can do that. I think the last thing I'd mention is the main difference. Also, I think both have very different talent immigration approaches. Canada is, other than recent policy changes, usually very aggressive in the terms of how they're going to welcome in new international talent. And one of the things I heard was, even, for my tax interns going down into Brazil, that was actually a problem. We didn't know the pathways to get Canadian students into Brazil, working with Brazilian companies. So I think Brazil could learn a little bit from Canada on adopting things to make sure that there is that, give and take of talent on both sides.
Excellent. Gina, I want to ask you about this topic because I see that there are so many potential synergies between the academia, industry, public and private sectors. Sometimes we have amazing researchers, PhD, doing research that are going to change our lives, but they are not applying and collaborating with organizations that can expand and put it in the market, right? So this dialogue between the universities and the researchers and the private companies and the public sector sometimes doesn't happen. There is no bridge between them, guiding them and communicating. Looks like a different language, like they were speaking different languages, right?
Perfect. Yes.
So during our mission, we had great conversations about that, and I could also clarify for so many companies how they could have support for universities in Canada, even though they are in international markets, that they can collaborate with researchers inside Canada and work with companies from Canada or outside. So there are potentially great opportunities of collaboration, like a triple helix. So can you tell more about this and how Mitacs can help with this foundation of Brazil-Canada tech collaboration?
Definitely. So yeah, the triple helix is really kind of the makeup of what Mitacs does. We are a delivery arm of public funding, both federal and provincial. And really at the end of the day, we take that public funding, but also the public priorities when it comes to sectors, and we funnel it into businesses to work with academics to push innovation, but also to push productivity in Canada. We know that we can't do this alone, so we invite international counterparts to participate within these projects. Now, how can this act as a foundation for Brazil and Canada collaborations? The one word is talent, right? And so I think this is one of the hottest commodities that it's such an interesting time because some sectors don't have enough of it, some have too much, especially with, we were talking about AI changing landscapes. So knowing that there's a lot of talent out there and just understanding the ways to use it in all spheres, and that knowing that one person doesn't need to just sit in one silo. What one person is working on, what researcher is working on could have cross impact into all these different places. So when it comes to Brazil and Canada, coming down to the talent aspect and where is talent being produced? Well, at post-secondary institutions, the upskilling of talent, right? So if someone, or reprofiling of talent. So if you're wanting to upskill someone or reprofile talent, that could happen again at a post-secondary institution. So finding ways to work that into curriculum, having those institutions connect on both sides, and then working in what is needed from the private and public sector into those relationships. To make sure that talent is now not only being upskilled and reprofiled where it's needed, but is also getting that commercial and industry exposure as well. And when you have that cross exposure, like we were talking about in the previous question, you're then creating this global, international minded talent force. So you're creating this diaspora, you're creating these connections, but then you're also creating a talent pool that is needed in all fronts. And it's not competing, right? Because this person is at the center and creating solutions to problems that could help all players within the triple helix. So I think we don't see post-secondary institutions as much of a nucleus to this big industry commercial relationship that can happen between Canada and Brazil, but it's a lot more of a driver of it than I think we give it credit for.
And Raquel, if you'll allow me just to
Of
chime in on
course.
that one, because I've been doing some work with Dalhousie University over the last 10 years or so, on and off, and they have a program that is super innovative. It's doing business in emerging markets, and they take the students to the market in which they're assessing based on case studies that they're doing with Canadian companies looking to expand into the markets. And this year they went to Brazil. And so it just demonstrates that there is a need, there is a want, there's a demand from the student body, and there's companies that are interested in that. And so if you're a company that is looking to potentially expand, think of using universities as a nucleus to understanding a little bit more. And of course, shameless plug, give us a call at Alcance Solutions to build that bridge as well. But I think it's just such a great opportunity to involve universities in that are changing the mindset of being more internationally focused and building those bridges, not just for research, but also as a bridge for industry as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gina and Andrea. I think you both touching specific topics that companies and researchers struggle to create more synergy, and they can be helped by Mitacs, by consultants, by organizations that can create this bridge. So I think it's something that we can improve for sure. Marcelo, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to touch base one thing. I think the major paradigm shift, at least from my experience, between Canada and Brazil, and in respect of universities and students, and it's particularly the bilateral exchange, was with the Science Without Borders program. I thought that was a very successful program. We saw a huge influx. The influx was north, was just one way at that time. And my involvement back then with some of the universities in Brazil, they weren't really offering the programs in a language other than Portuguese. But I think we all saw and experienced that the universities are now offering these programs in English as well, which addresses that obstacle of a Canadian student saying, well, why would I go to Brazil if the language is going to be a barrier to me? So I think, we discussed it because we went to universities and incubators, that the fact that English is a very, very common language that is spoken in Brazil as well, particularly in a university and a incubator environment. I think that's going to significantly improve our bilateral relations. I have a question. We have a question from one of the attendees, and I'm hoping our panelists can touch upon this. Climate disasters seem to be increasing year after year. How do you believe Brazil and Canada could learn more from each other, exchange ideas, and pilot new solutions in preventing and dealing with the impacts? Also, there is probably going to be a huge agenda of reconstructing the south region of Brazil, how to rebuild these cities in a more sustainable way. So who would like to touch upon that?
I'll chime in on this. Oh, okay. I'll chime in to start, and please others add on as well. And I appreciate that there's only a few minutes left, and so this discussion could be had for an entire webinar. But I do think that I spend a lot of time researching Brazil's environmental regulations and policies and how it deals with a major issue of deforestation and how that impacts climate change in various ways. And how that aligns with Canada's interests as well, because Canada and Brazil both have experienced terribly devastating wildfires, for example, and that's just one topic. And Brazil, what I was most impressed by is its use of data to try and manage that in the best way it can. It has some of the world-class data for monitoring deforestation and forest fires that I've seen worldwide, and that's something that Canada could certainly learn from. So the way in which Brazil manages that information and how it uses it for policy, of course, it changes based on administrations, how climate change is addressed. But I would say that would be one example. And again, being data minded and finding ways to leverage data to address some of the challenges of climate change as well, and having that dialogue. I think dialogue is incredibly important, particularly with Brazil holding the G20 presidency this year. I think and next year, if I'm not mistaken, hosting CUP, it's a huge opportunity for Brazil to demonstrate what it's been able to develop here, and maybe some of the gaps that other markets could also help, and in Canada could be one of them. There's so many similarities in industries, agriculture, and some of the challenges that climate change has on agriculture. Mining is another one as well, and so there's lots of ways to learn from each other, but dialogue is number one, and then thinking of the ways to leverage the information that's out there in the best way possible. But I believe it was Salo that asked the question. Happy to have a chat any time offline to have a more fruitful discussion on this topic. Happy to.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Gina?
Yeah, I'll try to make it super quick just so that we can try to abide a little bit by the time. But I think there's a really interesting opportunity here for a player that I think is generally left out of international kind of relations. And when we think about international connections and collaborations, it's really not something that's thought about, but municipalities. And when I first started at Mitacs, one of the very first missions and projects that I had was actually going with the mayor of Ottawa to the Netherlands, because it had just come off the cusp of, we actually had floods in Ottawa as well. And Ottawa said our canal system is not set up properly to react to floods, and we don't have the infrastructure. The Netherlands, which is just a system of canals, how do you do it? And so it was this really interesting but almost novel international mission. And Ottawa just did one also to London, to the UK. And so I think leaning into that a bit more, because these are entities that aren't competing with each other, right? They have that need, they can pool resources. Again, they have the connections to the researchers that are local to them. There is some probably, you know, provincial and federal funding that could be available to them as well. But we often leave them out of that international collaboration equation. So when it comes to things like natural disasters, especially if they're a lot more, you know, geographically located and they're more common in places, they have obviously a huge skin in the game of what comes out of those kinds of solutions. So leaning into them as players, especially with this question and the theme of this question, I think is something that needs to be explored a little bit further.
Thank you. That's great. We're running out of time, but before I move it over to Raquel for the closing, Gina, 10 seconds, 3 words to sum up your experience in Brazil with the trade mission and the BCCC.
10 seconds and 3 words?
You now have 8 seconds.
I know. Okay. Insightful, learned so many new things, connections, met so many people, so much follow-up to be done, and truly motivating. So it really broke a lot of inertia in some places that I think were sticky for a long time. And it just kind of really pushed that through to really start that momentum leading up to a big year for what could it be for the Brazil-Canada relations.
Great. Thank you, Gina. Andrea, 10 seconds.
They're really just synonyms of what Gina said, but inspiring, fruitful, and then I'll have to add this one because it really was fun.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Raquel, I move it over to you.
Thank you, Marcelo. On behalf of BCCC, I want to thank all of you, our sponsors, partners, members, and Andrea and Gina for the amazing webinar and participation and all the collaboration you did with all of us. Our webinar is going to be available on YouTube in the upcoming days, and this event is one of many that BCCC organizes to promote connection within the tech sector.
Thank you. On the 18th of June, we're thrilled to host the second Meet Brazil BCCC cocktail during Collision 2024. This event will bring together a delegation of Brazilian startups for an unparalleled network opportunity with our vibrant Canadian community, including investors, incubators, legal, and more. Last year's event was a tremendous success, with over 170 guests representing 120 companies. This year, we're expecting an even larger turnout, making it the perfect occasion to expand your network into Brazil. We're excited to offer membership and sponsorship opportunities that provide your company with visibility through our marketing materials and a chance to deliver a short speech at the cocktail and more. Registration is now open for this event. Visit our website or contact us directly to secure your spot. We're committed to ensuring our members connect with everyone they need to meet. And the link for that registration is in the chat box. Don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated on all our initiatives. Let the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce help you expand your network in both Brazil and Canada. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. See you in Collision.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in Collision. Thank you.